Hey everyone, and welcome to the Materials and Vertex Blending portion of the workshop. In this section, I'm going to go over the importance of vertex blending, my process, and what I think about when I approach large structures in 3D, such as castles, and then go over my castle scene as a whole and discuss how I accomplished a believable looking result. First, before we begin, I want to thank my friend and fellow environment artist Kurt Kupser for making and providing me with the master material for this project. I highly encourage all of you to stop by his art station and check out his amazing work. Now, since I won't be able to provide the material for this course, don't worry, any vertex blend shader will work for this tutorial, such as the free shader from Megascans. Now, the reason I want to cover vertex blending is because it's become such a crucial step in creating environments for me. It's essentially opened the possibility of creating whatever size structure I want without having to create a ton of unique pieces, which can be really time consuming. So starting out, as always, let's take a look at some reference. So I chose these references because I really like the different variety of textures that these walls had on them. As you can see, if we zoom in here on this image, there's a really nice gradation of color that happens in this. There's really white stone here, and then as it transitions up, you get sort of this grayish color, and then you kind of get these different streaks, and then there's lichen and moss and really a whole bunch of different things that are going on, which I thought was really great. Something that really caught my eye though was this sort of white mortar color that's in between each stone. You can see that here, and you can also see that in a lot of other different references. So that was something that was really striking to me that I wanted to try to achieve with the blending and the materials. Also, you can see that there's this different spotted lichen up here that I really liked, which is really cool because it added a sort of third layer on top of everything. And last, I chose this image, an image from Demon Souls. I chose this image because I wanted to see how someone else had solved the issue of blending a really large structure and blending the materials of that large structure. So something that I always do, I always study a lot of images first before I start making any materials or making decisions on what I want because there's just so much detail that you couldn't really make up in your head. And it's really just here for you to use as inspiration and help with any of your projects. So at the start of the project, I knew that I wanted to use Megascans as much as I possibly could. Now, when I started to bring in Megascans materials to test them out, I realized that there was probably going to be an issue. Now, on the left is a material that I sculpted and I made, and this is on a 4x4 meter plane. And as you can see, I have a human scale reference right here next to it. Now, on the right is a Megascans asset. This is a really good material. It's really cool. There's a lot of different things happening in here. One of the things you can notice right away is the different sizes of the textures and of the materials. And one thing I noticed when I was looking at the different castle materials on Megascans was that a lot of them were scanned at a 1x1 meter radius or a 2x2 meter radius. And I knew right away that it may not work because I was really trying to get something that would have been scanned at a 4x4 meter radius. Now something I did was take the material and just place it on a wall anyway. This is actually an 8x8 meter wall. And I tried to just scale the material down to try to fit what I needed. But then the issue you run into is that the more you scale it, the more the repeat of the texture is going to be noticeable. So if I go ahead and bring over the parameters for this material, and I change the tiling X and Y to 2, you can see that the scale is actually getting a lot better as far as matching the scale of these stones, but you can see what's happening where because this was shot at a 1 meter by 1 meter, when this is tiled 2 times on an 8x8 meter surface, you can see where the repeats are. And if you can't, I can make it a little bit more obvious. So the repeat is happening just like this. So every square that I'm drawing, that is where that texture is getting repeated over and over again. Now with the texture that I sculpted, it's being repeated, but it's only being repeated 4 different times. Now, there is obviously some vertex blending going on here, but just to demonstrate the different tiles between the 2 different textures. And this is really important in deciding your different texture sizes and when it comes to blending and to keep a consistent textile density. So Next, what I'd like to do is go over the material that I'm going to be using, and also I want to go ahead and show how we can get this simple one-noted stone material to look something a little bit more like this, where it's got a lot of different vertex blending going on, as well as some decals put on top of it to sort of break up the surface and make it look a little bit more interesting and more believable. So starting out, you can see that this is the first material slot that I have. It has things like UV adjustments. It has a place to put the albedo, normal, and the metalness, roughness, occlusion, and height map. Then under tuning, I have the ability to tint the albedo. I have the ability to strengthen the normal map. I have parameters for the metalness, the roughness, the height multiply, and the height contrast. I use these basically for all of the rest of the blending with some different caveats. Next, if I scroll up, you can see that I have a different material set up. Now, for this one right here, this material is going to be essentially mimicking this white sort of discoloration in the castle. And if I go ahead, I'll show you what the albedo looks like, since that's probably the most interesting looking map. So I just created this by simply using a bunch of different textures I found on the web and just blended them together to create this. And then using Substance Alchemist to create the normal map and the rest of the maps. Now, essentially what this texture that I'll be blending in is doing is it's using an RGB mask. And I can open that up and I can show you that each channel represents a different type of mask that it would be used for blending. So let's go ahead and let's open up the red channel only. Now, even though I'm not going to be using this particular mask, what this is doing is essentially it's more of a leak kind of feel to it. So any areas that are white, that's where a texture would show through. Any areas that get darker or more towards black, that's where the texture is going to show up last. Now for the green channel, this is going to be basically painting in that sort of white crevice that I really liked. As you can see over here, this is really what this mask is going to represent. And lastly, if we go to our blue channel, this right here is going to be mimicking more of the sort of the white that we talked about earlier. Now, I've gone ahead and set up this material to basically meet my needs in terms of the mask multiply, the vert color multiply, and the height blend. So this is just basically telling it how strong I want the mask to be when it's blending together with all the other materials. So again, just to cover that really quick, essentially I just have a grunge mask right here that's being used as the base material and textures, and it's being masked through by whichever channel that I'm telling it to get masked through, which in this case, I want it to be going through the vert color blue. So anytime I have my blue color selected for my vert channel, that's what's going to be painting. So now you can see if I go ahead and scroll up to the top, I have a bunch of different things that I have set up in here. I have flintstone. Now this is actually a material that I did use from Megascans. It's actually this material down here at the base. I like this because it's really organic and it's less noticeable in its tile. So it actually worked really well for this. Next, I have things such as a macro albedo. And essentially what that's doing is it's taking a texture, a really big texture, and it's masking it over the entire thing, and it's doing kind of like an overlay. And what that's doing is helping break up a lot of the smaller shapes that you can see here. And so that's pretty much a brief overview of how this works. Again, the Megascans material works really similar to this in that you can have the power to adjust a lot of parameters and settings to get the results you need for blending different materials together. So now that we've talked about that, let's go ahead and try vertex blending this wall and see if we can get close to this result here. As always in Unreal, to get to vertex blending, we'll go up to this little paintbrush here. We'll go to paint. And we'll go ahead and I'll start with the red channel because I know that this flintstone is corresponding with my red channel. So let's go ahead and just paint the base here. Let's make sure that we have our paint color from white to black. And let's set our strength back to 0.5. It's getting a nice blend in there. So something that I always pay attention to when I'm vertex blending, the different macro shapes it's making. And what I mean by that is if I just stare at this right now and I look at the difference between these two textures and the shape that these two textures make together, it's doing something like this. So I'm always paying attention to these shapes. And I try to avoid anything that looks abnormal or maybe it doesn't fit right. And a way to sort of combat that a little bit is you can always mess with the strength. So if you want to paint in really heavily, you can increase the strength there. And if you sort of want to soften things out a little bit, you can decrease the strength and sort of build up pretty slowly. Now, these are being blended using height maps, and that just helps give it a more believable look. So I like this right now. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Start with our green channel and see what this is going to do for us. Let's go ahead and actually increase the strength. All right, so we have that really cool sort of white grout color. Now, before I start painting this, actually, let's go ahead and erase that. What I want to do is I want to get that sort of white grungy feel to it. And I know that I have that on my blue channel. So let's go ahead and try that out. Something else that I look out for too is just to try to paint something and make it feel organic. So when you're going along, try not to paint things too evenly and split everything maybe into thirds or to quarters. Maybe this is a quarter of the 8 by 8 meter square. Maybe we could paint this and have this go up quite a bit here. So now let's go ahead and we'll transition and we'll go back to our green channel where we have this sort of white grout. And let's just kind of slowly, I'm just tapping a little bit. I'm just blending this into the previous texture we just painted down. So you can notice, I mean, we just painted a lot in a short amount of time, but already you can tell that there's really no repeat anymore because of what all the blending that we've done. And that's really what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to just create the illusion that there's so much going on here on this wall, and it's just a flat wall. So the last thing that's really important to always do, you don't have to do this, but it's something I really recommend because it just helps sell the blends and it helps sell the believability of everything. And that is by using decals. So let's go back to the reference here. Now I just really liked the different lichen that's growing on this wall. It adds a nice breakup and adds an interesting little bit of detail. I actually just created something really simple in Photoshop. You can see I have it here. All right, that's definitely feeling a lot more organic for sure. Now, lastly, I did get this decal from Megascans. Megascans has an awesome selection of decals, and I highly recommend you check out their selection. All right, so that's looking pretty close to what we have over on this side. So you can just see how quick this happens when you have materials that work really well together and just sort of how they blend. So if I look at this one more time, and if you squint your eyes, you can sort of see, what I'm seeing. I'm looking for those big shapes, looking for how all of this is blending together. So I'm looking at this shape. I'm looking at the shape of the leaks. And I really like that. That's a nice sort of balance that we have overall. So you sort of have this lower tier of flintstone, and it's sort of old and more damaged, and then throughout time, stone was sort of stacked on top of this and built on top. And then it gets up closer to the top, and we have these grunge leaks. Now, that could definitely be from rain. Okay, so now that we've gone over sort of blending and how to achieve a good result, the next thing that I want to talk about is when you're approached with a wall that's quite large. This wall is 16 meters by 24 meters, and this is one of the pieces I used on the large castle in the back. So you can see right away that there's a lot of repeat going on. And this is something that's going to be really obvious when you have a structure in the background that just has a tiling material over it. You're going to be able to see the repeat of that. And it's our job to try to limit that as much as possible, if not completely limit it, so that way you don't ever notice a repeating texture. So let's go ahead and bring in the reference from Demon Souls that I had. So this is something that I spotted when I was trying to figure out how to solve the issue of blending a large structure together and blending that structure's materials. And I noticed here that there's almost this sort of stucco going on. And it's really nice because you can see that there is a little bit of stone here. I can see some slight grunge leaks going on at the top, but a lot of it is really just this stucco blend, and it helps to hide a lot of the repeated stone that's going on. The first place that I looked was Megascans because I know that they have a really, really good selection of stucco walls. So what I did was I created a new material instance of the material that we just painted, and I really just limited how many textures I wanted because I knew that this was going to be seen from a distance and there wouldn't be any need to really show that really fine blending detail. So what it has is just the stone material and it has a plaster material. And I will be going in and showing this on the actual castle in just a little bit. Let's go ahead and blend some plaster onto this big wall here. You can see what this is doing is it's just hiding that stone quite a bit. And it looks like a lot of the plaster was just peeled off from the stone as the castle has aged. This may not look like the best thing right now up front because what I did was I did take this texture of the plaster always before I start my projects. And that was because I knew that this was going to be seen from a distance and I wanted to pull out a lot of the different interesting color that's going on inside the plaster. And to be honest, this was actually the quickest solve that I had for that. There was no need for me to really go any further than just paint this for the back castles because it just broke up all of the tiling and it looked really, really believable. Okay, so now that I've talked a little bit about my process and the different things that I like to think about when I'm going through and blending materials together, let's go ahead and jump into the castle scene and let's take a look at that even further. Okay, so here we are, and you can see that all of the materials and all of the things that we just applied in the last section were all done here as well. So if I go ahead and zoom in on this wall right here, you can see that we have the same thing. We have the flintstone mixed with some of the white grunge texture and the white grout. And then as we go up, we have just sort of grunge that hangs down that can sort of mimic dirt or rainfall. Let's look at how the back of the castle was achieved. So you can see really clearly that the plaster is actually kind of working to our benefit because this castle is just so big and it's pushed back into the background really far. And if I scoot back here to where a player would see it, you can sort of get the illusion that there's definitely stone there because I know that this right here in front of us was built from stone and I can see little hints of it back there as well. And it just sort of fades into the plaster. And this just really helped to soften things down so it wasn't completely noisy because initially there was just stone scattered throughout the entire thing. And you can see even over here that there's just pure stone work there. And then it kind of fades up and you can see the plaster, how the plaster starts at the top and kind of goes down. And as we go down, the plaster starts to wear off a little bit more. So again, for our purposes, it really didn't matter that I took the plaster material and scaled it down because at the end of the day, we're never going to actually see the detail here. So that means I really don't need a high resolution texture and I don't need it to tile that much. So this has been a brief lesson in the importance of using good blending techniques and also what I think about when I'm working on larger structures and how to achieve believable results. I look forward to seeing how you apply this in your own work.